and welcome to Inside the Admissions Office, the official podcast of InGenius Prep and your go-to resource for expert admission strategy. My name is Jillian, and I'm excited to be your guide through this wild ride of college admissions. Each episode, I'll bring you insights from former admissions officers who know the ins and outs of getting into your dream school and their firsthand experiences reviewing applications. Our strategies have helped countless students gain acceptance to top universities, and we're here to help your students gain that competitive edge and do the same. Whether you are just starting your college prep journey or knee-deep in applications, we've got you covered. So grab your notebooks, pencils, and maybe a cup of coffee. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for another exciting episode. I'm really excited today because we have a very special guest who's no stranger to the show, Heather McCutchen. Heather is a former admissions officer at InGenius Prep, bringing her a wealth of experience in Ivy League admissions. And this episode, we're diving into Heather's fascinating journey as a mother and a former admissions officer, and she's going to share some insights on how she nurtured each child's individual strengths and fostered their independence, giving us a peek into her holistic approach to education like this one.
One of the really important lessons of raising children is to teach them that when stuff goes wrong, you just have to figure it out. So I think that's resiliency, it's creativity, it's thinking outside the box. All of those things I think are so important for kids. And I think it's essential that parents don't just do it for them. So it's a progression from doing it with them, encouraging them to speak up and take part, and then watching them start to do it themselves is really fulfilling.
And this.
There were no majors that we would have said no to. That's something we hear a lot as counselors. My parents won't let me major in X, Y, or Z, or I have to major in A, B, or C. I don't think that's a good way to go. I'm a big believer in a liberal arts education, right? Where you learn to read and speak and think and write and problem solve, and then you can do anything. I'm a big believer in grad school education being determinative of your career instead of undergrad. That's what we told our kids, was like, do whatever sounds exciting to you for undergrad.
All right, let's get into it. Hi, Heather. Welcome back. I just wanted to say it's so great to have you with us again. And just to share, we also have quite a few new listeners that are tuning in lately. So could you give us a quick introduction and maybe share a little bit about your background and your experience in admissions?
Sure. My name is Heather McCutchen, and I've been working with InGenius since 2016, but I've been working in admissions since the 1990s. I'm also a published playwright and author, novelist. I'm a parent. I have 3 children, mostly grown. My youngest is a junior in college now. So my husband and I are very proud of the kids and live in New England with our dog and enjoying our first grandchild.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so good to hear. Congrats. So I know we have a lot to chat through today. Let's begin. As both a mother and a former admissions officer, could you tell us what insights did you gain along the way that shaped how you approached each of your children's education and personal growth?
So I think the best advice I ever got from someone in admissions was a dean of Dartmouth College admissions who told me that he felt the kids who did the best in the admissions process were the kids who were happy. We were looking for our first child about whether to send them to a pretty intense private school or to a private school that they liked that was much more kind of laid back. And the dean said to me, Heather, the kids who go to a school where they are happy tend to get more involved in activities, tend to take leadership positions, tend to be comfortable stepping outside of their comfort zone, taking risks, tend to make better relationships with teachers. He said, ultimately, the kids who feel happy in high school end up being stronger applicants. And we've taken that advice really to heart with all 3 of our kids along the way. And I think it's made a huge difference to how we parented them through the teen years, through high school, starting with the decision of where to send each of them for high school. We took a pretty significant risk, especially with our youngest in that choice, in order to let them follow happiness. Everything has worked out beautifully, but there were some risks along the way.
I love that you mentioned about letting kids really follow their happiness. I honestly could not agree more. I feel that when kids are in that zone of doing something that makes them feel really happy and fulfilled, they will really thrive and grow, which is also a very good segue to my next question. When it comes to balancing academic rigor with letting your kids follow their passions, it must have been a juggling act, right? With all three of them. I'm curious, how did you make sure that they had space to explore all of their interests? Were there any unexpected challenges that you went through or any breakthrough moments during the process?
We drew some lines in the sand. They knew what our expectations were. They knew we wanted them to take the most challenging courses they could take, and then we expected them to get good grades. But at the same time, all you can do is your best attitude. And I had some pretty non-traditional attitudes towards that myself. My kids, in fact, are very type A. They put a lot of pressure on themselves. I did not, in fact, have to put pressure on them. They always are perfectionist. I was in the opposite boat. For instance, I told my kids who would get very anxious about exams, if they ever showed me they had gotten an F on an exam, I would give them $50 and take them shopping. And in fact, each of them at one point in high school, each got an F on a math exam at a different time. And I did give them $50 and take them to the mall. And my lesson to that is it's not the end of the world, right? One failure on one exam is not going to ruin your life. Let's go do something happy, forget about it, and then we'll get back to the work. It's better to just shrug it off than to sit and wallow in it for a long time. So really that was our approach. Do the best you can. And when your best is not good enough, move on and take on the next challenge. My husband really thought this was taking things too far, but ultimately he let me set the tone with the kids' education. And again, some kids need more pressure to be challenging themselves or to be perfectionists. Our kids were at that level of just being a perfectionist, always worried and anxious about their work. So we were at the other end of the level of concern.
I really appreciate that you brought up the topic of perfectionism and anxiety. For kids who are managing mental health on their own can be very overwhelming, and it's not always easy for them to find ways to cope. As a parent, I'm curious about your approach. How did you and your children navigate these challenges together? Are there any strategies or practices you found helpful in overcoming these obstacles?
Yes, again, not going to work for every kid, but for my kids, we always looked up what was the maximum number of days they could miss from school, and we always took the maximum number of days off. So when they needed a break, when they were overwhelmed, when they needed extra time to work on a project or extra time just to sleep, we took a day off. We always maximized the number of days off, and it gave them a chance to recharge. They always knew that if they were reaching their breaking point, they could have a moment to get extra sleep, to reset themselves. And again, I think this was one of the things that really helped them not crack under the pressure because they were taking very challenging courses. They were pushing themselves in their extracurriculars. And it's a lot that we ask of our high achieving high school kids.
It's interesting that you mentioned all of your children are very high achieving school kids. And even though it seems that they're very similar in that way, I feel like every child is also unique in their own learning and growth. Could you maybe walk us through how you identified and nurtured each of their individual strengths? How did you ensure that each of them received the attention and guidance that they needed?
Sure. Yeah, they're all different, aren't they? My husband likes to say it's a crapshoot every time. You never know what you're going to get. So our oldest is a classic first child, very much a rule follower. She went to Dartmouth undergrad and then on to Harvard School of Education in getting her master's in arts education. She's now a musical theater director and a teacher. And that very much suits her personality, right? She's definitely a natural teacher and loved school, loved classes, loved order and discipline and structure. So as a parent, that's not easy, but it's something you can set up. When you have a child who needs structure, you can do that. You still have to make the effort to give them the structure, but you can do that pretty easily. Our second daughter also went to Dartmouth and then went to Boston University School of Law law. She's now an attorney working in immigration rights in Boston. She was very much a classic second child, very much rebellious. At age 3, she asked us, "Who put you in charge of me?" She wanted to be her own boss. And so really for that one, we learned how to listen to her, right? And respect her own ideas, because we found that us pushing our ideas on her would always end up backfiring, right? Listening to her ideas ultimately was the only thing that she was going to fully engage and buy in and work hard, right? We might be able to force her to do something we wanted her to do, but it was never going to be with her whole heart and passion. The things that she wanted to do, she was for sure going to run all the way with. And I see this with a lot of the kids I work with. I come up with ideas all the time of projects they could do to pursue their interests. But if they don't like the idea, if they don't actually click and think that would be fun for me, I would enjoy that, it's never really going to get off the ground. So I learned that from my second daughter, that having ownership over their direction is really important for a lot of kids. And certainly for Catherine, it was. And then our youngest, Thomas, set back in age, and many children who have older siblings, wise beyond their years and very clear about what they wanted, very mature all the way through. Thomas is a theater kid and knew that they wanted to go to a performing arts high school. They wanted very serious theater training. This was the big risk I was talking about earlier. Our first two went to Catholic girls' schools, not the most intensive boarding school situation, but a solid academic high school experience. But our youngest went to a performing arts school where half the day was taken up with singing lessons and dance lessons and acting lessons. It was a big risk to take, but it was incredible for Thomas. And again, coming back to that happiness lesson, because Thomas was so happy, they really excelled. They took on enormous risks and challenges, but we had to draw some lines there and say, okay, you're going to go to this school that does not really emphasize academics, so you're going to have to do work on the outside. You're going to have to take some additional AP classes. You're going to have to do some supplementation of academic work in order to just have the things that colleges look for. And because Thomas wanted to fill their schedule with so many arts classes, for instance, they didn't have room for 4 years of Spanish. So they ended up taking American Sign Language online in the evenings, things like that, which I view as a high risk choice. But in their application, Thomas wrote very directly in the additional information section about, this is my education and I've made these choices. This is what I want from it and I'm enormously proud of it. And I think that kind of ownership over their own education ultimately was really successful. They got into Harvard and Yale, and now having a very happy junior year at Yale, very happy to be there, where the theater scene is incredible. Yeah, so each kid was different and we learned a lot from each of them. And I certainly apply those lessons to the kids that I work with as a counselor today.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing. I love that each of your children is unique and that you have very different approaches for each of them. How did you find the right balance between fostering their independence while also still staying actively involved in your academic journey?
I'm very interested in education and childhood development. As a parent, I was always pretty engaged in doing activities that were educational and being involved. And when we reached junior high, it was a weak link in our school system, as I think it is in many school districts. I think junior high is a very difficult time period. The kids are tough, right? Hormones are raging. And even if you look at the curriculum, a lot of the curriculum from junior high has to be repeated when they get to high school because the kids are not retaining the information. So my husband and I decided that I would homeschool them for junior high. So that was definitely a situation where I was all hands on for 2 years for each of the kids, in charge of their curriculum. There were some things that I farmed out, like lab sciences. I didn't really want to do frog dissection on the kitchen table, so that I signed them up for classes at a local university, but I managed all of their educational choices for those 2 years. And I do think that experience gave me a dialogue with each kid about their education and what were the the priorities and what were the rules, what were the guidelines that we were going to absolutely stick to, and what were the things that were choices that we could negotiate and discuss and see what interested them. So I think that those 2 years gave a real framework to what was to come during the high school years.
I want to dive deeper into that homeschool curriculum and that framework you just mentioned. If other parents are interested in doing the same as what you did, are there any resources or tools you could recommend to them?
There's so many. The problem with homeschooling is not that you don't have resources, is that you have too many resources. How do you pick? And I think additionally, the same resource may not work for each of your kids. I had different resources for different kids, and different families want to homeschool in different ways. Some families want to literally create school at home and have different class periods and have a very structured day. And some families are completely wide open and flexible. I was somewhere in between. We had certain subjects that we did every single day because they built on a progression, namely math and foreign language. But then, like for literature, I didn't care what they read. They could pick any book as long as it was a new book, right? I personally love to reread favorite books. So they were allowed to do that after school hours. Once their friends were home from school, they could reread. But I knew if I didn't set that limit, my oldest in particular would just reread Harry Potter every day. So I had to set a line in the sand there. I didn't care what they read. They could read any book they wanted. And then we'd discuss and we'd do projects and we'd write papers about the book. History, we primarily did by visiting museums and historical sites near us. We live in New England. There's a lot of history, American history, very close by. So we did a lot of that. I remember my oldest in particular being worried that she would be behind when she went to high school, that she would have missed things. And so my feeling was 2 years of homeschooling during junior high was actually a pretty low stakes time. The kids knew how to read. They knew how to do all the basic mathematics. They knew a lot of the basics about history and science. They had gone through a very good school district. They had a lot of the fundamentals. And we could take 2 years as a sort of sabbatical to dig deeper into all of the things that they were most interested in. Depending on the kid, we spent time. One learned to sew. One learned how to do metalworking with like blow torches. One learned how to do pottery. One learned how to sketch scientific illustration, I guess is what it really was. So we all kinds of different interests that they wouldn't really have had the time to pursue if they had been in a traditional school curriculum. We traveled a great deal. I took them to India. I took them to China. I took them to Korea. So they were able to fully have these experiences of seeing other parts of the world, which I course is so valuable for anyone to do. In addition, my mother lives with us and she's a big current events person. She loves the news and the newspaper. So every day the kids had to spend time with their grandmother and go through the newspaper with her and read about current events and discuss with her, which I think not only strengthened their bond to her, but just gave them an awareness of kind of where adults really should get their news, right? Not from Instagram. I think there were a lot of good lessons they learned during that time. It was a terrific experience. I would do it again every time. It was great. I loved it. And I don't know what my kids would say. I think they would say that they loved it. That's what they say to me. I don't know what they say to their friends when I'm not in the room, but I definitely see that they benefited from it.
Wow, I'm so glad that everything worked out for you when your children are all grown and achieving great things in life. Now, I'd love to dive into some mom moments and anecdotes from your journey. Were there times when challenges really tested your patience or taught you something significant as a parent?
Of course. I think some of the moments I've mentioned were really big challenges, like the moment of deciding whether to allow Thomas to attend the performing arts school. People told us their opinions, of course. You get opinions from family members and from the community. And the same with homeschooling. We had neighbors tell us we were ruining our kids' lives by choosing to homeschool them. It was very stressful to do something different. But I've always embraced doing what feels right over doing what everyone else is doing. but it isn't always comfortable or easy. Sometimes you have to really tune out the negativity and just listen to your inner voice of what feels right as a parent. And so that's what we did. But definitely now people are all very proud of us and very congratulatory because our kids are doing really well in this moment. But along the way, there was lots of, oh, you've done it now. You've ruined them now. They'll never amount to anything. I think kids are pretty resilient, and I think kids can stretch and handle a lot more than we give them credit for. And I think giving kids extra opportunities to learn in new ways, I don't really see how that could be a bad thing. I'm a big believer in things like a gap year. None of my kids would take a gap year. I tried to convince them, but I think it's not really conventional. It's not what everyone does. But if your kid needs more time, give them a gap year. Let them take that. I think that those sorts of opportunities can make a huge difference to the trajectory of somebody's life, their readiness and their energy for embracing the next phase. So I'm just a big believer in listening to the moment and listening to your kid and reacting to what they need, not just what everybody else is doing.
I absolutely love what you just said about listening to the moment and listening to your kid and reacting to what they need. I think a lot of parents don't do that enough. Now, I know you mentioned 2 of your children are now grown and that your youngest is a junior in college. Let's rewind a little bit when they were all still discovering their identities, interests, and going through the college application. What values and skills have you focused on instilling in them as they prepared for college? Have these priorities changed over time?
Sure. I think for us, problem solving is probably way up there on our list of abilities we want our kids to have, right? Things always go wrong, and you have to be able to adjust and figure it out. I have a t-shirt I wear sometimes that says, I will figure it out. When I'm under a lot of stress, I wear my I will figure it out shirt. And I think that's one of the really important lessons of raising children is to teach them that when stuff goes wrong, you just have to figure it out. So I think that's resiliency, it's creativity, it's thinking outside the box. All of those things I think are so important for kids. And I think it's essential that parents don't just do it for them, that they learn how to do that for themselves too. So it's a progression from doing it with them, encouraging them to speak up and take part, and then watching them start to do it themselves is really fulfilling. So I think that's a huge value. All of our kids are really creative. We definitely always surrounded them with crafts and music and opportunities to build and create. My husband is very athletic and played a lot of sports growing up, was very good at it. None of our kids had any real interest in sports. We tried because he very much wanted somebody to play sports with him, and it just didn't take. So I think a lesson from that is just that they are who they are, right? You can't force them to be someone else. And we tried all the sports. We tried soccer and tennis and golf and figure skating. Actually, that's a funny one. My middle daughter kept asking for figure skating, and we kept putting it off because nobody in the family knew how to figure skate. And we kept thinking that would be a real pain in the neck to have to take her to the skating rink. But she wouldn't give it up. She asked for 3 years. Finally, I took her figure skating, and she loved it. She didn't want to compete or pass the levels. She just wanted to skate, and she did it for years. Anyway, I guess my message to that is a lot of parents that I work with feel that the kid has to be on the lacrosse team, even though they hate it or they're not good at it. But if they hate it, there's no real benefit there. Let them do the things that they enjoy. So that was something my husband had to adjust to with our kids. Like they did not want to be on sports teams. And by the end of elementary school, we had tried them all and we moved on. So I think, again, it's about listening to them and taking those cues, taking their opinions pretty seriously, because otherwise you're just fighting. So don't make conflict for yourself.
I like how you said that because I can totally relate. I think my parents and I did not have the best relationship because they've always forced me into doing different things that I didn't like. So I totally understand.
Yeah, it's very common, I think. Parents have their own vision of what matters, but I think you got to re-examine that vision sometimes and ask yourself, does that really matter? Like, are there other things that might replace that?
That's a good one. I like that. So this next question is also a very interesting one. We have heard from some some parents that the college application process can be a real battle, especially when kids and parents don't see eye to eye. When the added pressure of aiming for Ivy League schools, how did you manage to guide your children through the entire process without really overwhelming them? Were there any key factors in helping them navigate such high expectations?
For sure, my InGenius colleagues, even though I do this for a living, like getting my own kids to listen to me, no matter how good our relationship is, I think having someone who's neutral in able to give advice and set deadlines, it makes a huge difference. So I really appreciated the help of my InGenius Prep colleagues who read essays and gave advice to my kids. So I definitely say to parents out there the value of that. Like when it's just parent on kid every single day during that process, whew, that's a lot because it is, what's the kids' process? It's horrible for them, but it is so stressful for the parents too. You just want so much for everything to go well for them and you can't control it. And it's very emotional. So I think just the strategy aside, the emotional benefits of having an outside counselor are huge. It just keeps peace in the house to a much greater level. And then I think with our kids, we were very open about what they wanted to major in. There were no majors that we would have said no to. That's something we hear a lot as counselors. My parents won't let me major in X, Y, or Z, or I have to major in A, B, or C. I don't think that's a good way to go. I'm a big believer in a liberal arts education, right? Where you learn to read and speak and think and write and problem solve, and then you can do anything. I'm a big believer in grad school education being determinative of your career instead of undergrad. That's what we told our kids was like, do whatever sounds exciting to you for undergrad. And so far, that's worked great. Our second daughter majored in human geography at Dartmouth and then went on to law school, and that was a great major for her. There's no right or wrong major. Our youngest at Yale is a theater and performance studies major, but has already had great experience that could easily lead to employment in arts education or arts management. So I really believe that there's no bad major. So I think that mindset makes the college process less stressful as a parent. If you don't have your own narrow ideas of what the major has to be or what the school list has to be, it will be much easier for everyone. My husband had stronger ideas about some schools that he had to be on the list. Our youngest, of course, it would have been very strategic for them to apply early decision to Dartmouth. Both parents, both siblings all went to Dartmouth. They would not even apply. Not early decision, not at all. They said they were afraid that if they got in, we would make them go, and they just felt like it was not the right place for them. I think they were right, but it was very hard on my husband to hear that. They just wanted them to lock in an Ivy League school as early as possible. So there was a little concessions back and forth. That's how Harvard even got on the list. Was my youngest said, okay, I'll try Harvard for you if you don't make me apply to Dartmouth. I love Dartmouth. It's an amazing place. It's my alma mater. My daughters absolutely loved it. It wasn't the right place for my youngest.
It's so amazing hearing all of the things that you've mentioned and that all of your kids found a place or a college that is the right fit for them. I definitely feel that they are really happy at where they're at. So it's just so great to hear. And thank you for sharing that. Now we've reached our final question. For parents who really want to support their children to the best of their abilities, what is the most valuable piece of advice you would share, especially for those aiming to support their children's academic success and personal growth?
Yeah, I think really finding the things that your kid is willing to invest time into. I know a lot of kids will say to me, there's nothing I'm passionate about. There's no one topic that I care about. There are ways to figure that out. There are ways to identify what excites them. The older they get, the more specifically you can look at that. One way is to go to a college majors list. Go look at all the majors at NYU or Cornell and see which ones sound good to them. And then go look at what those courses would be like and see which courses sound interesting to them. If you can start to identify area or 2 or 3 of interest and then expose them to opportunities opportunities where they can get to experience more of that. I think that that is a great way to start to encouraging them to think deeper in a certain area, envision themselves growing and doing things in a certain discipline, giving them opportunities to try. Some of these disciplines don't exist in a high school level. There's not really anthropology at many high schools, for instance, right? If that sounds cool to them, give them a chance to try it. Take them to a museum, to an exhibit, let them take an online class, like explore the things that sound good to them, even if you don't know what they are or why your kid's interested. Follow their lead. I've never been sorry when I've followed my kid's lead.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you would like to speak to one of our experts, you can set up a complimentary strategy call with one of our enrollment counselors by following the link in our episode description. And for more information and access to additional resources, you can register for our webinars, which is also linked in the episode description. If you have any questions or would like to request a topic for a future episode, you can email me directly at jillian.yong, that's JILIAN.YONG@ingeniusprep.com. Thank you for listening to another episode of Inside the Admissions Office, and don't forget to follow the podcast so you're notified every time a new episode is available. That is all for now, and I hope this was helpful for everybody tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.